to record. There we go.
Okay, great. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's Sustainable Living Series webinar. Today we have Teresa Kudo, registered dietitian with Queen's Hospitality Services, and she's going to be providing information on how Queen's Hospitality Services is working with their food service provider, Aramark, to assess the climate impact of menu offerings. So without further ado, please welcome Teresa Kudo. Thanks, Teresa.
Right. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining today. So as Marlo mentioned, I'm the registered dietitian and wellness and sustainability manager with Hospitality Services. So I'll be talking about sustainability in our food service operations and how we apply sustainability in our day-to-day operations, as well as use of a program called Cool Foods, which I'll talk about in the latter portion of the talk today. So just for a bit of background about Hospitality Services, so we operate under Housing and Ancillary Services, and we're responsible for the provision of food service operations on campus. So that includes 3 dining halls and numerous retail food locations on campus. And we operate on a management fee agreement, and our food service contractor is Aramark Canada. And so as part of our contract agreement, we do have several key performance indicators or KPIs. So for the purpose of today's talk, we will be discussing 3 of those KPIs today, which are local sourcing and fair trade, food quality and diversity, and waste diversion. So, of course, there's lots of definitions of what constitutes local sourcing. So for the purpose of our contractual agreement, we've identified 3 different tiers to define local sourcing. So hyperlocal is tier 1, and that includes food produced within 100 kilometers of campus. Then there's local tier 2, which is food produced within 500 kilometers of campus, but located within Canada still. And then tier 3 is food that's sourced within Canada. And so we have agreements in the contract set. For tier 1, it's that we increase by 1 local producer each year. For tier 2, we needed to start with a minimum of 30% of our food purchases within 500 kilometers of campus, and then an increase year over year of 1%. And lastly, for tier 3, that 2/3 of our food purchases, or 66%, are produced within Canada. So last fiscal year, we did exceed our goal. So we had 42% of food purchases were within 500 kilometers of campus and 67% within Canada. So that was great to see. We also, I just thought I'd snapshot some of the hyperlocal food that we purchase. So we have cheese curds from Wilton Cheese Factory. In our catering operations, we use charcuterie from Creel and Gambrel. We also have gluten-free baked goods in our catering operations with Joe Diodato. They also have a produce business, but this is a sub business, I guess, or another business that is within the family. And then Burn Brae Eggs, of course, they're located within Lynn, Ontario. Pasta de Folla was a new partnership as of last summer. And so they're a female-owned business in Belleville. And so we have some of their product offering on our campus market. And then we continually look to improve and increase the number of hyperlocal producers, even if it's beyond the increase of 1 annually. So this isn't hyperlocal, but just to give you a snapshot of a newer product that we brought on site, we obtained the Comeback Snacks product. So it's a female-owned business out of, I think it began in the Hamilton area, and it's really expanded. But we want to support, female-run businesses and other equity-deserving groups, of course, as much as we can. And then last but not least, our Queen's Bees honey, which I'll talk about our apiary in a couple of slides. So stay tuned on that one. Oh, it turns out I'm talking about it on the next slide. So as far as our apiary pilot project, so this is a 2-year pilot project with, of course, the hopes of expansion beyond the 2 years. And we installed a apiary at West Campus, right near our community, the community gardens. And so we partnered with a registered commercial beekeeper who's in the Belleville area, I believe, or Tyendinaga area, Dawn Forster. And I'm just going to admit someone here. So in our partnership with Dawn, we brought 4 hives to West Campus, and then the bees we're told were very happy with their location. They're right close to a water source, which they appreciate. And of course, our campus ecosystem also appreciates having the bees on campus. And we have been able to enjoy the fruits of their labor. So we yielded 480 pounds of honey in September of this year. And then we've used that honey in some of our recipes. So in residence dining, we've incorporated them in a variety of incorporated the honey in a variety of recipes. We've also used it at the Donald Gordon Hotel and Conference Center. We also offer it at coffee, tea, and toast stations, as well as we have them for giveaways and things like that for special events as well. And so the program or the project was so successful that we're looking to expand this spring. So we are going to increase from 4 hives to 10 hives this spring in partnership with the beekeeper. And we were also approached by the Limestone Beekeepers Guild and are going to look to partner with them as well as Dawn to facilitate some experiential learning opportunities. So the details haven't been ironed out for that, but we're excited to bring that aspect. That's a key aspect to having the apiary on campus, is to present an opportunity for learning for the campus community. Okay, so moving on from our local sourcing KPI, I guess I didn't really touch on fair trade, but we are a fair trade certified campus, and we have been for, I think, 2 years now. So we continue to manage that certification program, which means that all of our coffee is fair trade on campus. That's any business that's directly run by campus administration. And then there's at least 3 teas that are offered in all of our locations and a chocolate where chocolate is offered. And then annually we do educational events for the campus community to raise awareness about fair trade and that we're a fair trade campus. So we'll be having an event in April in the hopes of continuing that discussion and encouraging other groups like, maybe just faculty lunchrooms and things like that to consider looking for fair trade products, Fair Trade Canada products wherever they can. So moving on to quality and diversity. So we use 100% sustainable seafood as well as 100% free-run Burn Brae eggs. We also, so there's a program through Aramark called Get the Good Stuff. And so they have a certain set of nutritional criteria to identify menu items that are of higher nutritional quality. So that could be because they are including fruit and vegetable, whole grain, and then there's other parameters like certain thresholds for sodium, calories, and saturated fat. So the goal is to have 30% of our, the requirement is that 30% of our menu offerings meet the criteria for Get the Good Stuff in our residence dining, as well as, for example, in our fresh to go products. So those are the packaged products that are made on site, like sandwiches and salads and things like that. That would fall under the Get the Good Stuff menu program as well, where a portion of those would meet that criteria. We also emphasize plant-based nutrition, and we continue to grow the number of offerings that we have that are vegetarian or vegan offerings. So 30% of our offerings should be vegetarian or vegan. And there was also the addition of a wellness icon, Plant Forward. And Plant Forward means that the entree has 60 grams or less than 60 grams of animal protein. And then there's plant-based protein in the dish, of course, as well. And then just to give a couple other examples of how we look at quality and diversity with respect to sustainability. So we do regular audits of our retail locations as well as dining halls. And so in our retail locations, so for example, location 21, Lazy, Wally's, we look to make sure, is there one vegan entree at each station? Where soup is offered, that there's a vegetarian offering as well if there's more than one soup. If there's, with a TAM, many TAMs have a side that are included with them. So we make sure that there's also the option for soup or salad, so it's not just fries, for example. Okay, so the next KPI, or the last KPI that we'll talk about, is waste diversion. So we participate along with the campus-wide audits. So each of our dining halls participates, and we're able to obtain through facilities, the organic waste data as well as other data. And we have a minimum KPI of such that 90% waste diversion is the goal, with a reduction of overall waste of 10%. One way that we divert waste is through donating food scraps to a local pig farmer. So our goal is 300 pounds per week of food scrap donations to this pig farmer. We also have LeanPath technology. So LeanPath allows us to measure waste, pre-consumer waste and post-consumer waste. So pre-consumer is waste in the kitchen. So whether that's from food scraps or food peels or broccoli stems, things like that, that we try to encourage use of as much of the product as we possibly can. We do track the pre-consumer waste. And then for post-consumer waste, that would of course be whatever is left after it's been consumed, so the leftovers, for example, in the dining hall. We have had a bit of issues with the LeanPath technology this year. So our goal, though, is to continue to capture that information, that data. We had a workaround for this year because the LeanPath technology wasn't, some of it wasn't working in our dining halls. We were still able to measure the waste from specific pilot days in the dining hall where we trialed a trayless dining model to see the difference in waste. And it was about a 28% reduction in food waste when we compared the days with trays to the days without trays. And then we also look to divert waste through food rescue as well. So that's through our daily donations. So we donate through Lionhearts picks up food on a regular basis, as well as Clean Soul Food. So between the two organizations, food is picked up on a daily basis from our locations and then brought to organizations in the Kingston community, as well as we donate to the AMS Food Bank now on a daily basis. And we rescue food and bring it to the Peach Market, which is the pay what you can market. It's called Providing Equal Access, Changing Hunger. So this is where we take food from our operations that is untouched and we repackage it and have entrees and soups available at the Peach Market for those who are facing food insecurity. And it's run by the AMS Food Bank volunteers. And lastly, I mean, I could go on about waste diversion and the strategies that we're trying to implement to, curb the amount of waste that we create, as well as divert waste from landfill. But we have been really successful with the Good to Go reusable container program this year. So it was implemented first as a pilot in 2019, and this year it really expanded. So we have had 164,474 containers, or containers that were swapped or containers diverted from waste streams with our Good to Go reusable container program. So that involves use of the reusable container in any of our Queen's proprietary retail locations. So we're really excited about that. And we actually exceeded our goal, which for the year was 100,000 swaps. And we thought that was a pretty hefty goal, considering last year's swaps were about 25,200 swaps. So yeah, so that's great to see. Oops. Okay, and so if you wanted to see more information, I am going to switch gears a bit in a second. But for more information about the different sustainable initiatives that we have, not just through waste diversion, some of the KPIs that I talked about today, but just more broadly covering all of the UN SDGs. The framework, the Housing and Ancillary Services Sustainability Framework, covers that what we're doing in a department as a whole. And then on our hospitality page, so queensu.ca/food, you can see under our commitments the different projects and initiatives that we have on the go. Okay, so as I said, I'll switch gears to talk about the Cool Food Meals program. So this was a program that we launched in the fall of 2022. And so Cool Food Meals is a program that can be used by different businesses and organizations if they take what's called a Cool Food Pledge. And so it is a third-party certification system through the World Resources Institute, which analyzes recipes, looking at ingredients, all the ingredients in recipes, and doing life cycle analyses to determine what items are low climate impact. So Aramark had introduced this in the States, and then they are piloting it in Canada as of the fall of this year. And they've selected a few different post-secondary institutions, with Queen's being one of them. And so Cool Food Meals identifies a maximum threshold of kilograms of CO2 equivalents per day, and then it identifies a cool food meal based on certain threshold allocations, which I'll talk about shortly. Additionally, a cool food meal has to meet a Nutri-Score of C. So what that is essentially making sure that the recipes that we're choosing are not just climate friendly, but they're also sustainable from a nutritional standpoint. So they're of high nutritional quality. So we've started with 250 recipes in the fall that were analyzed and approved as cool food meals this fall. So the maximum daily allocation of kilograms of CO2 equivalent is 19. And so that was determined based on 2030 climate goals. And it's a 38% reduction in the average North American meal. So they've taken the 19 kilograms of CO2 equivalents and determined what the allocation then is per meal. So that's 20% of that daily allotment for breakfast, 30% for lunch, and 30% for dinner. And then the remainder you would account for through snacks and drinks. So how the cool food meals are calculated is using these two factors. So it looks at agricultural supply chain emissions as well as the carbon opportunity cost. So with agricultural supply chain emissions, we're looking at the on-farm emissions. So that could be from things like manure management, soil fertilization, energy use, enteric fermentation, so like cow belches, for example. So there's that aspect as well as the supply chain emissions. So looking at processes for transportation and packaging, things like that. And actually, so supply chain emissions really only account for 3 to 6% of the total carbon emissions that we would see from on-farm emissions. And the carbon opportunity cost, so this refers to so foliage and land, they want to sequester carbon dioxide from the environment. And so they're carbon sinks. I'm sure that a lot of you are already familiar with this. So when we engage in deforestation for agricultural purposes, we're losing that opportunity to sequester carbon dioxide from the environment. And so they classify, I guess, the emissions as a result of this as a carbon opportunity cost. and it's explained further here, but I hadn't really heard of it described that way previous to this. And so I thought that was really interesting and hopefully something that students will learn more about. I know I did a pop-up event in the dining hall, and it wasn't something that the students I was speaking with anyway were familiar with at the time. So this is just a helpful visual representation of the kilograms of carbon greenhouse gas emissions, I should say, per gram of protein. So I'm sure this isn't big news for a lot of you, but lamb and beef are the greatest producers of greenhouse gas emissions. It's probably a bit difficult to see from the slide, but the lighter portion of the bar is from agricultural production, and then the darker shade is from land use change. So we can see that the majority of emissions really are derived from the land use change that we see. And food that comes from animals makes up 2/3 of all agricultural greenhouse gas emissions and accounts for 3/4 of agricultural land. And I guess just building on the land use change, so 50% of habitable land is used for agricultural purposes. So it's pretty significant. So this is just a helpful illustration to show how we would look at a cool food meal and the criteria that would be used. And so we're looking at the kilograms, or Cool Foods is looking at the kilograms of CO2 equivalents per meal. So you can see each of these meet, they're below the threshold, so they would technically meet the cool food meal requirement from that standpoint. If we also factor in the Nutri-Score, you have to have a minimum of a C. And so the salsa cheddar quesadilla would be disqualified as a cool food meal in this case. And the Nutri-Score, I understand that they looked at different sorts of nutritional scores, scoring systems, and they decided to go with the Nutri-Score, which is British, because it's been used, I guess, since 2007, and there's quite a lot of data to support use of the Nutri-Score. So what they do is they assign positive points to things like fiber and fruits and vegetables, and negative points to things like sodium and saturated fats. So since the fall, so 250 recipes, as I said, were analyzed and approved, and then they've expanded now to 358 recipes. Aramark has set a goal of having 40 to 50% of their menu offerings as cool food meals. And so these do need to be complete meals or entrees. It's not intended to be, again, for snacks or single foods. And although many vegetarian and plant-based options are cool food meals, that's not a requirement, just as long as it is considered low climate impact and meets that nutritional safeguard. So as I said, I did do a pop-up in the dining hall within the last couple of months, and there was another one last semester as well. And so the goal, I'd like to continue for students, to engage students so that they're more familiar with cool food meals. And I definitely think this will be an opportunity moving forward. It likely will be another metric that we use in our sustainability framework to begin looking at what percentage of our meal offerings are cool food meals and how can we increase that with time. So yes, definitely an area for opportunity. And I wanted to just note some considerations. So the recipes that are analyzed with cool food meals are Aramark Canada corporate recipes. That being said, there are variations from account to account. So at Queen's, we have the requirement that we use 100% free-run eggs, for example. Other accounts may not necessarily have that requirement, or they may have other requirements that are more stringent potentially than ours. And so there are individual factors within account to account that would likely impact the calculated greenhouse gas emissions. But for the purposes now, Cool Food is looking at those I guess in general, the recipes that Aramark Corporate would use. So that could present an opportunity in the future. Also, I'm sure as you know, with life cycle analyses, there's not necessarily standardized, these are the metrics that you would use for a life cycle analysis. So, some may include, in this case, I don't think they look at water use. They look at the greenhouse gas emissions and land use. But there are other metrics that could be factored into a life cycle analysis that are not necessarily included in this particular model. And then as far as the impact of carbon labeling, I know that it's still a relatively new area. It has been around for a couple of years, but it is, as far as the impact on consumer choice, I think that's to be determined as far as what the extent of that impact is. I do think, though, beyond just consumer choice, there's also the impact on food industry. And I think a great thing about Cool Foods is that it is setting a standard for different corporations to consider the climate impact of their menu selections. So I know, for example, like Panera Bread is one of the large businesses that uses the Cool Food meals. So if more businesses are encouraged or feel the pressure, I guess, to do carbon labeling and do those analyses of their recipes and formulations, then I think that that's a great thing. And there are more institutions that are adopting carbon labeling. UBC is a Canadian university that has a similar system run by their, I think, sustainability office, and then Laval University and the Polytechnic in Montreal are the ones that I'm aware of. I know there's others in the US as well. Yeah, so that's it for the presentation portion of today's talk. I did say it was probably going to be a little short and sweet. I'm happy to take questions. I may just stop sharing my screen.
That was great. Thanks, Teresa. If anyone else has a question, go for it. But I was just going to ask, do you guys also track how much water you use in the dining halls for like cleaning the dishes or the trays or whatever else?
I can't say that we do that. I don't believe that we do. I will say, on a somewhat related note, that we are going trayless in the fall in our dining halls, and reducing water use is one of the factors that research has shown demonstrated impact of going trayless. So although we don't have the metrics to my knowledge of water use, I'm hopeful that will reduce significantly with we're also getting a new dishwasher, so hopefully more efficiency in the equipment, as well as going trayless will help to reduce that impact.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
Philip?
Hi. Well, thanks for doing this. That's wonderful. You're doing this and thinking this through. This is great. But I have a question about, local versus distant foods. Life cycle assessments have shown that the environmental impact, at least in terms of global warming, for transport is typically about 4% of the total, which means that the differences in how the food is prepared locally versus distant source of the food are more likely to make a bigger difference than the transport. So for example, if blueberries in the winter here have to be grown in greenhouses or are frozen over the winter, whereas if you can buy it from Chile, they don't have to refrigerate it, they just have to transport it. It's going to be greener to get it from Chile than to get it locally. So because transport is such a small portion of the total impact, do you take that into account about how differences between, the farming practices here versus elsewhere make one choice, local versus distant foods one being greener than the other?
Yeah, that's a really good point. and I actually think I even spoke to that in last year's presentation, is that it's not all about choosing local because of that exact factor. I think I gave the example of like tomatoes grown in greenhouses, that it probably is more sustainable to get them at times from out of country. So I guess the question is that something that we're factoring into our decisions? Is that right? Yeah, I think that it's definitely an opportunity for us to discuss further. I think when we set these KPIs a couple of years ago, it was prior to prior to me being in this role. And I know that we're always learning, like more research is always coming out, and we're always learning. And so I wouldn't be surprised if I'm not saying we're necessarily changing the KPIs just yet, but it's definitely something that needs to be considered and talked about. Yes, absolutely.
Thanks.
Go ahead, Anja.
Oh, sorry. I think one of the things that we hear from this, as well as your presentation, Teresa, which was awesome, by the way, super helpful, is that it's actually really complicated, right? We'd like it to be sort of easy because we all know this is urgent and we really need to act. And if we don't act, then we're in big trouble. We may already be, but it's just like Philip pointed out, you know, so are we looking at transportation costs? Are we looking at supporting a local worker that is working in Presente County, let's say, versus in Chile? So there's just lots of stuff going on. My question has a little bit to do, as you mentioned that you've done some pop-ups in dining halls. Are you able to gauge student interest and student, I guess, how are they reacting to this? Are they picking up on this? Do they feel like this is really important to them? Or is a student at the age that they're coming here and they're so overwhelmed, likely with a lot of other things, are, as much as they would like to be interested, are they are sort of counting on the fact that we are doing the stuff that we can and we present them with the best they can, and they are sort of following in those footsteps? How do you feel about that?
Yeah, so the impression that I've gotten, so we have 4 student sustainability ambassadors that we hired in the fall, and they assisted with some of the analyses for our tray list considerations. So they did a lot of engagement with students for a couple months, talking about tray list dining and some of the impacts there. And through those discussions, because I think that students tend to be a little bit more receptive when their peers are engaging with them versus if this old lady is engaging with them, let's say. So in hearing from the sustainability ambassadors, generally students, they're sort of students on either end of the spectrum. Some are really passionate about it and get it, and some not so much. And generally the impression is that they're kind of indifferent. That's what I've heard anyway, just through various conversations with them and just conversations with students in general. I will say that in terms of engagement with that event, students loved trivia. They loved, like, I had a spin a wheel with different cool food trivia, and they seemed to really like that, and they seemed interested and also like surprised. So that was cool to see. I mean, it is a different subsect of students that are going to decide to come up and speak with me because they see this low climate impact, and probably not, probably not capturing the full student population there. But yeah, does that sort of answer your question?
It does, and it does confirm a bit my suspicion. And I think it's even more important that, while there's lots of other stuff going on for these students, that we try, even as staff working here, we have a big impact too, to sort of present them with the best that we can, so they can be indifferent and still make a good choice. My other question is, has somebody thought about putting microwaves out? Are there microwaves in student dining halls? I find sometimes students, they are ready to prepare their own food, sometimes because of choices of diet, and sometimes because of, monetary considerations. And I often find students wandering around trying to find a microwave to heat up food that they've made at home.
So with the Yeah, I don't know exactly. I mean, most of who I support are students who are on the residence meal plan. So for those students, the meal plan is mandatory. And so our dining halls aren't, or not dining halls, our residence buildings aren't really equipped to prepare their own meals. But that has been brought up to me, and we definitely don't, we have a microwave in the gluten-free friendly pantry for those who require like gluten-free microwave. So that's specific to the residence dining halls, but that's all that I'm aware of.
Yeah, Teresa, it's Lynn, when we used to have microwaves in Matt Quarry and, you know, the sort of those larger areas. And I think it became an issue, wear and tear and cleaning, and, you know, people having spills in them, and then they wouldn't clean it up. And I think that's finally the decision was made to not replace when they finally expired. But I do think it's a good suggestion, Anya, and I've seen people looking for microwaves myself. So maybe it's something we need to revisit and have a cleaning schedule for them.
Any more questions from anybody? Go ahead.
Hello?
Hi
We
there.
can hear you.
Hi, sorry, I'm having a bad connection, so just let me know. Thank you for all of that. It was very insightful. I was just wondering how local producers of foods are able to begin doing business with Queens.
That's a complicated question. So I know that, you know, we work with a number of suppliers. The campus executive chef would better be able to answer, I guess, how the ins and outs of that would work. I know that they have pretty strict requirements around not food safety, but what's the word I'm looking for? I guess food safety, and making sure that the practices align with like public health regulations and things like that. Like I think they have pretty strict criteria. We have begun some initial discussions. At one point we were looking at potentially like a vertical farm, but we've shifted gears instead to see how can we partner with a local farmer, potentially to, if there's like a land consignment opportunity where, you know, a portion of the land or a portion of the what's grown is supplied to Queens. And so we've started those initial discussions. I guess where it all begins is somebody can reach out to the dining@queensu.ca account, probably gets filtered to me, and then I filter it to other people, and lots of discussions happen. So I guess that's in a nutshell what it is.
Thank you. And who is the campus executive chef?
Chef Colin Johnson.
Cool. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, that's where we leverage, I guess, the expertise of our food service provider. But there's, I guess, again, because we're a management fee agreement, we can also, you know, set the standards of, you know, what we want to be seeing. And so, yeah, there's sort of a collaboration there.
And anyone else have any more questions? Or if nothing's coming to mind, you can always email myself or Teresa if anything pops up. And if you want to watch this back, you can go onto the Sustainable Queens website and it'll be posted there. Feel free to end the recording if you can see Teresa. I think it should be